I'm Carole Taylor. On this edition of Journal, a subject that's near and dear to me, governance. I know, your heart is beating faster at just the thought of this topic, but bear with me. If you are a government or a nonprofit or a business of any size, if you get the governance right, then you're on your way to success. Sadly, it is often in government that we find problems. The example that is glaring in its unmanageability is Metro Vancouver. Imagine this. You're the chair of this organization with 41 members, many of them are mayors, sitting around a very large table representing 21 municipalities, Tsawwassen First Nations, and Electoral Area A. And every single one of them they've got their own priorities and problems that they want addressed. How can you ever make that work? Importantly, how are decisions made? Like for the overdue, vastly over budget wastewater project that went from $700 million to $3.6 billion. Is it by consensus or by accepting a staff recommendation? In part because of this dollar shock for taxpayers, Deloitte was asked to take a look. Their report highlighted many challenges with the Metro Van model, including the obvious fact that the board is just too large to manage, that directors' expenses should be trimmed, and perhaps the chair should not be a politician. So, with all these problems, why would anyone willingly take on the near impossible task of reorganization? Well, fortunately, Mayor Mike Hurley of Burnaby has stepped into the fray and is serving as chair. He calls himself a person of action and warns that possibly big changes are coming. To find out where we're at, the mayor joins us after this break. Well, Mayor, you sure don't run away from challenges. You're running this successful, wonderful Burnaby municipality, but now you're in the hot seat at Metro Van as chair.
Yes, and it certainly was something I thought long and hard about before I jumped in to take on what was going to be a time of change. And we know that, the governance structure within Metro Vancouver hasn't really been looked at seriously for 30 years or more. Little pieces added here and there, but no real. So anytime you have a big organization like Metro Vancouver, $3 billion a year, it's a big organization. If you don't keep challenging that governance structure, that things are going to, not be where they need to be. And so to get that governance structure back in order takes time. It took 30 years to get here. So it's going to take, hopefully, 30 months to start turning it around. And that's my goal. The one reason that I jumped into Metro Vancouver, as you would say, is that I'm very confident that no municipality can be successful if Metro Vancouver is not successful, because of the huge infrastructure projects that are put through Metro Vancouver very successfully for the most part, with one exception, and that's the thing that most people pay attention to.
Well, it's interesting when you say municipalities can't do it on their own, because intellectually, if you said, we'll let each municipality build their own little sewer system and hope it connects to this sewer system. So we know you have to have regional, but it sure is a governance structure that I don't know how you make better. So let's look at it in parts. First of all, what's good about it right now that doesn't need to be changed?
Well, I think what's good about Metro Vancouver is that every day you wake up and turn on your tap, it works. Every day you flush your toilet, it works. Every time you have a shower, everything works seamlessly. And make no mistake about it, if Metro Vancouver wasn't working, we would have bigger challenges. So we have to realize There's 530 kilometers of large structure water pipe all through our community run by Metro Vancouver. There's 560 kilometers of large-scale pipes running through Metro Vancouver that takes our waste to the wastewater plants. And that all happens seamlessly and gets replaced seamlessly. You know, we've just done 2 massive water tunnels, one from the North Shore to Burnaby and one from New Westminster to Surrey, that will serve the community for 100 years. You know, those are $500 million projects that all went very, very well.
So
very
you're not
seamlessly.
the headline. You're out of the headlines if it worked.
And no one talks about them, right?
Right.
So there are a lot of good things happening at Metro Vancouver. I would say the vast majority of things that happen at Metro Vancouver are good. We just need to, you know, work on our governance structure as best we can, given that there's 21 municipalities. There's a First Nations that are part of that. And then, of course, we have a district that's part of that as well. So, you know, melding all that together and holding it together takes, you know, a lot of cooperation. And you know, people leaving, we always say people leave their municipal hats at the door. Well, that doesn't likely happen as much as it could, but I will say 95% of the time, all the votes at Metro Vancouver are usually unanimous. So you know, there are good things that are happening. Can we do better? Of course.
Well, let's look at that, because you've got 41 members around the table, as you say, including 21 municipalities. How do you even chair a meeting like that? Does everybody get to speak?
Well, I've limited now to 3 minutes per person to speak, because, you know, too often we're hearing from, like you do at municipalities, you hear from the same group of people all the time. And so I've really limited the speaking time so that it does give everyone an opportunity to speak. Because many people sitting around that table were getting very frustrated that their chance never came. So I've really opened it up to try and make sure that people have an opportunity to speak when they need to speak. You don't always need to speak, but unfortunately some people think they should.
Can anything be done about the numbers?
I think, you know, we have a committee, governance committee, looking at that right now. And so Metro Vancouver, the makeup is 4 different boards, right? We have 4, it's not one. We have sewer and water in one board. Sewer, then water, housing, and GVRD. So there's 4 different boards. So I think what they're looking at is perhaps to look at those as 4 separate entities and maybe have a way to change the numbers in that way. That's what the governance committee appears to be leaning towards right now. I'm hoping that will come up with a reasonable solution that, as you say, makes the meetings a lot easier to chair.
And I've looked at various models and thought, well, sometimes the solution is you have an executive committee that really go into detail and make the big decisions, and then it's brought to the board. But that causes a lot of distrust and unrest, because who knows what you guys are talking about behind the scenes.
So, and who's on the executive committee? Is that the chair's call? Because, you know, you're opening it up. So it's difficult, but I'm very confident that we can get there with a model that works, that will match the great efforts of the Metro Van staff that are on the ground actually doing the work. So I'm confident we'll get there.
Who makes that decision? How much power do you have as chair?
On the numbers
reorganization or the separate boards?
Well, much of that structure is under a governance of the provincial government. So, like, if we want to change the numbers, the 41 members, for example, the provincial government has to agree to that. And remember that, you know, Metro Vancouver is not the only regional district. There are 27 others that fall under the same, you know, the same governance structure. So the provincial government has to think about that. But the provincial government does have a rep at our governance committee meetings. So they're engaged in everything we're doing. and hopefully we can get to a point where they feel comfortable. But at the end of the day, as far as board size, it's the provincial government that will make that decision.
And they'll also make the decision, if it happens, to have 4 separate boards.
Well, we do have 4 separate boards, but
not attached to
each other. So, all of that, it's not just as simple as me as the chair, which some people think that I could just make those changes. It's not that simple.
So when you came in and took this on, you said you're a man of action and, a man that supports change and you know what needs it. Are you satisfied with the pace that everything's going at?
Needed change. I should say, change for the sake of change isn't necessarily good. We have made 19 very important changes so far. The recommendations from the consultants recommended 48 different changes.
So what big ones have you done?
Well, one of the biggest one that seemed to cause a lot of grief for people out there, although it never even happened, was, at board meetings, it's set for 3.5 hours. So if you go into a double meeting, then there was a double meeting fee. As a matter of fact, that only happened once in my 6 years prior to just recently. But we have changed that to now it's a single meeting fee, no matter how long the board meeting goes. Coincidentally, the last 3 board meetings have gone for 6 hours. So But, people look at that and think, it's a $500 per diem for a meeting. But you've been there. It's,
yes.
12 to 2,400 pages of reading before you get to the meeting. So it's, you have to be really prepared. So it's not just about the meeting. It's about the preparation time that hopefully most people are spending a lot of time doing.
I want to talk to you a bit about housing, and because it's such an issue within the community and what your responsibilities are with that. But we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back. Metro Vancouver is a complicated organization. Can you clarify for me what your responsibilities are in terms of housing?
In terms of housing, Metro Vancouver has been in the housing business since the 70s. We have 10,000 residents that live in Metro Vancouver housing. Now, usually this gets built when cities like Burnaby donate land to Metro Vancouver, and in some cases even donate money. Very successful, I would say one of our most successful things we do is those housing facilities, 3,500 units, 3,700 units, I believe, with 10,000 people. But so our responsibility is to deliver that at no cost to taxpayers for the operation, and that's what we do. And that's gone on, as I said, since the early 70s. Metro Vancouver has a very successful housing model that once those buildings go up, they operate within their own budget, away from taxpayers, and very proud of the work that's done there.
You seem to also get tossed around a little bit by the provincial government because they have policies like all of a sudden densification around the province and one model fits everybody. And then they said in this last budget that BC Housing was going to deny all the applications for housing that came in last year in 2025. Just all declined.
Yep.
How does that affect you?
Well, I think I've been a super big critic of how the provincial government has approached housing. I never thought that they should be telling cities how to. I mean, the city of Burnaby has been planning and doing housing for, 50, 60 years. We believe that we have the best planners around. And to me, and the provincial government should stay in its role and its lane, just like we should stay in our lane. We're good at housing. Just drive through Burnaby and you'll see we know how to build housing. Provincial government, in my mind, should perfect building hospitals, building bridges, building tunnels. And once they get really good at that, then please come and tell us how to build housing. But they've set these housing targets. They've pretty much done away with single-family zoning for the considerable future, unless a government comes in that changes that. So that's been a real challenge for us at municipalities, where they're saying 6 units on a single-family lot. And how do you make those livable units on a single-family lot without going really high or without using all the land? And then they're saying you don't need any parking. I mean, there's just no common sense to any of that. Now they've cut all the funding, and so the targets they have set for affordable housing just can't. It's impossible to meet it without their funding. So it's a whole big contradiction. And my belief is they should roll all that legislation back. Let the cities do what they do well, and that is plan and build cities along with their community and not against their community. So this whole thing has divided our community on what should be built. And in Burnaby, we have always been able to bring our community along, but unfortunately that was taken out of our hands.
So what are the chances of it being rolled back?
By this government, I don't think they have any intention of rolling it back. As a matter of fact, they've told me they have no intention of rolling it back. But I just think it was a big mistake and a big overreach by the provincial government.
And so it's a strange situation you're in, where all of a sudden you've found a funding model that worked to do this, and then the funding model goes away, but you still have to do this. I remember reading in the paper when it was quite a beautiful design for a community center renovation, I think, and you'd worked out the funding and how to do it. What happened there?
Well, we just, we had to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, well, we're not going to be able to fund this.
So that they pulled that funding?
They pulled that. They told us we couldn't use that model anymore.
Which was?
Which was density bonusing, which was what Burnaby used. We never had DCCs and ACCs, which are a completely different targeted model for what you can do. Density bonusing give us much more flexibility in what we could use it for. And it worked, because all those high rises that went up in Burnaby, the developers, although they didn't like having to negotiate with us, they still did it, and we still got the amenities we needed for our community. So
that community center had to be taken off the board?
It's been set aside for now. We're redesigning it. The intention is still to build that community center. It just won't be built to the level it was built before.
So you mentioned DCCs, development cost charges, and there were lots of headlines when Metro Vancouver decided the increased rates. What's happened there?
Well, we've come up with a plan there, working with the development community, that we would collect those charges later throughout the project. So that would take away from the money that developers were having to borrow. So we have made some great adjustments. But the fact is that the infrastructure that Metro Vancouver has to build, like the North Shore wastewater treatment plant, like Iona, a wastewater treatment plant, which are huge and needed, someone has to pay. And, what's the model for paying? Really, the perfect model should be that the higher levels of government who collect all the taxes should be chipping in to help fund those. But right now, there hasn't been any funding offered for Iona, for example. And although there was an agreement for the initial stage, $250 million each. So that work is being done, preparatory work for Iona. But Iona still remains a $6 billion project. And all the other big infrastructure changes that Metro Vancouver has to build to meet the huge building boom that the other orders of government say we must do. So finding a way to pay for that, DCCs was a model that we felt that growth should pay for growth. And if growth can pay for growth, then I would think the the taxpayers of the region would say, then why are we growing? So it's a challenge. Right now, it's a difficult time for developers. It's a difficult time for municipalities, and I think it's a difficult time for us all. But I have no doubt that within 5 years, we'll be back to building the apartments that were being built before. It's just taking a breather right now. And there are so many different levels to that. Like the Metro Vancouver DCC charges were 0.7% of a project, or 0.7 to 1% of a project. Now, some people are out there saying, this is why we can't build these projects. That is just not the case. Higher interest rates, and there are no buyers. That is really what is happening in the market. So we all have to work together to get to a place where Metro Vancouver can build the infrastructure that allows these big buildings to go up, or we have to agree that we have to slow down. And so somewhere in there lies the right answer.
I remember you saying to me once, yeah, that's great, more housing, more people, but they all have to flush the toilet.
That's correct. and buildings are not worth very much if you can't flush the toilet.
Well, thank you for all of the work you're doing and the energy you're bringing to Metro Vancouver. And I do look forward to seeing what changes, as difficult as they may be, happen, because I think the present system isn't perfect. And so there's lots of room for improvement.
There's always room for improvement, and I look forward to being part of the improvements that are made at Metro Vancouver.
Well, thank you. Good luck.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be back in a moment. It seems we're in the midst of a swirl of elections: provincial Conservative leadership, NDP federal leadership, several federal by-elections, and of course, municipal elections this fall. Well, I, for one, am glad that so many people are willing to put themselves forward to serve. It can be thankless, but it can also be enormously rewarding. Let me know your thoughts on YouTube. Till next time, I'm Carole Taylor.